If you ever see a man that looks like a Gandalf ripoff holding a gift or curse sign, just turn around and pretend you didn't notice him. As random as this advice sounds, it will save your life if you choose to follow it. I wasn't so lucky. No one was there to tell me to just avoid the odd 80-year-old wizard. Instead, I chose the wrong option and gave in to my curiosity. You see, months ago I just finished work and was walking back home, but then an unusual sight caught my attention. Standing right next to the nearby grocery store was a frail old man with an incredibly long gray beard wearing a cheap blue wizard robe and a matching pointy wizard hat. When I say cheap, I mean it looked like something a kid would buy at the costume store for Halloween. It definitely wasn't something I'd expect a man that looked to be well into his 80s to be wearing. More importantly, his shaky hands were holding a small wooden sign. Gift or curse was written on the sign in big red letters. I couldn't resist, so I immediately walked up to the man and asked, "So, are you providing a service?" The man instantly responded, "Oh, I wouldn't say it's a service. You have to pay for a service. What I'm offering is free," he said with a cheerful tone. "All right, I'm interested. Tell me more," I said, genuinely curious. The man put the sign down and calmly said, "What I'm offering is a game. You can choose to play it or you can just walk away. Naturally, if you decide to give it a shot and play the game, you will either win or lose. If you win, you will get a great prize, but if you lose, you will receive an equally great punishment." "Perfect. So can you tell me what those prizes and punishments are?" I asked. The old man smiled and said, "The prize is the ability to see warnings of the future. The punishment, however, is the ability to see creatures that exist far beyond the mortal plane." Yup, he's definitely crazy, I thought to myself. The old man reached into his right pocket and showed me a plastic card. "Certified Wizard" was written on the card. This so-called certified wizard winked at me and said, "As you can see, I'm a real wizard. My game is real as well. Best part about the game is the fact that it's completely luck-based. Just shake my hand and I'll know if you won or lost. Think of me as a human slot machine." I was stunned by his confidence. He was telling me insane things, yet he seemed to be so clear-headed and coherent. The strange man offered me a handshake. Curiosity got the better of me, so I accepted it. His grip was surprisingly strong, but he almost immediately let go of my hand. Calmly, he said, "It's done. Now you can figure out if you're a winner or a loser." Before I could even think of an acceptable response, he quickly grabbed the sign from the ground and walked away. As soon as I blinked, he was gone. I didn't know what to think. Was I just too tired after a long day? So I hallucinated a wizard out of sheer exhaustion? I wish that was the case. Instead, I quickly realized what happened was indisputably real. Even worse, I thought I lost the game. I decided to ignore the whole experience and just go home. But for some unknown reason, I had an urge to look behind me. I turned around. About 10 feet behind me was an odd creature. Its body was that of a mangled and twisted human being. Its face was horribly disfigured and covered in dozens of bloody wounds. It was missing one of its eyes, while the other one was bulging and bloodshot. The creature's jaw looked like it was shattered by a sledgehammer. Blood was dripping from its scarred mouth. Its tongue was hanging out of it like a dead earthworm. The creature just stood there, frozen in place, staring at me with its barely functional eye. I almost vomited as soon as I saw it, so I quickly averted my gaze. Based on the reactions of the people around me, I was the only person capable of seeing the creature. Days passed after this incident. The creature would appear randomly when I least expected it. Sometimes I would see it in the mirror, standing right next to me, but more commonly, I'd seen it in the corner of the room, just standing there and staring at me like it always does. The creature, even though harmless on paper, was destroying my mental state. I couldn't even sleep without seeing it in my nightmares. My last encounter with the creature was the most meaningful one. It was an average day like any other. I was just about to cross the street, but before I could do that, I received all the too familiar urge to look behind my back. As soon as I did, I unsurprisingly saw the creature once again, which in turn caused me to walk away as fast as I could, completely disregarding the fact that I was crossing the street at a red light. I don't even remember the car that hit me or how painful the hit itself was, but I do remember waking up in the hospital feeling like every inch of my body went through a meat grinder. Later on, the doctor explained to me that I was lucky to be alive. The truck that hit me has left my body in an almost unrepairable state. It would be easier for me to list the parts of my body that aren't fractured, because there's very few of them left. As soon as the doctor let me take a good look at myself in the mirror, the only eye I had left twitched, as I slowly realized that I didn't lose in the wizard's game after all. The second week of intense rains had begun. By this point, my backyard was partially submerged, the wet ground sinking beneath my boots, kicking up muddy water with every step. The water creeping across the yard seemed to have a will of its own, lazily pulling into larger puddles as my boots sank with a soft, muffled squelch. The air was thick with a strong scent of wet earth, soaked vegetation, and something else. Something metallic, cold, mingling with the sharp wind that followed each gust. That's when the first one came. I felt the hairs on my arms stand as static gathered in the air. Then the crash, a lightning bolt striking just in front of me. The flash was so bright that for a second everything around me vanished. The yard, the trees, the sky. Only that blinding white light remained. Then came the thunder, a deep sound not from above, but from all directions at once. It felt like the world around me was screaming, suffocated by the weight of the storm. I was trembling as the world returned, my feet rooted to the ground, while the rest of my body convulsed in shock. My ears were still ringing, and I couldn't even hear the incessant rain hitting the ground. I decided to run back to the house and cancel my plans for the morning. As I ran, the weight of the rain-soaked clothes dragged me down, each step harder than the last. The rain, thick and heavy, pelted my face until I finally reached the door and stumbled inside. I slammed the door behind me, leaning my back against the cold wood, gasping for breath. My chest heaved, and the sense of safety the house provided was fleeting, almost illusory. Outside, the thunder roared again, deeper this time, vibrating as if the very air was being torn apart. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to calm my nerves. Just a storm, I thought, just a storm. But something wasn't right. It wasn't just the violence of the lightning or the crash of the thunder. There was something in the air, a presence almost tangible. That strange smell lingered stronger now, as if the lightning had burned something invisible around me. I crossed the room, my heavy boots soaking the floor, and hesitantly approached the window. Outside, the rain fell like silver curtains, and the sky seemed lower, almost touching the trees. The clouds were so thick that they formed a dense, dark wall, a storm front. And then I saw them, standing in the clouds, between the cracks illuminated by the lightning, figures sculpted from the darkness itself. Their silhouettes barely moved, but their outlines were perfectly visible with each new flash of light, as if the sky was slowly revealing a secret that was never meant to be exposed. My eyes locked onto them, unable to look away. Tall, thin, with strangely human forms, but something distorted, something wrong. Their heads were elongated, almost oval, and their faces were featureless, smooth as polished marble. They had no eyes, but I could feel their gaze, heavy, cold, fixed on the earth. The storm seemed to intensify, the thunder now echoing in a near-military cadence. The lightning illuminated them for just a brief moment, but in that moment I saw more detail. Their long, thin hands, with fingers extending into almost imperceptible claws, reaching down as if trying to touch what lay below. The sound of thunder had changed. It was no longer a solitary crash. Now it was a continuous echo, a constant vibration in the air. Like a deep, ancient sigh, each roll of thunder carried a pulse that reverberated inside me, as if the bones in my body were attuned to feel it. And then I realized the sound wasn't coming from the sky, but from them. They were speaking, but their voices were so immense, so far removed from any language we could understand, that all we could hear was noise like static. These figures were communicating, talking amongst themselves, or perhaps with something below. I stood frozen, my mind struggling to make sense of what my eyes were seeing, but all rationality seemed to slip away. They were growing, their elongated forms, once only visible against the clouds, now stretched beyond the sky itself, as if the clouds were their shoes, or the extension of their limbs. Their shapes began distorting the horizon like reflections warped in a pool of water. It struck me then. They weren't really bodies, but shadows of something far larger, something that existed in another dimension. Another thunderclap, and this time the sound came with a new detail. Their faces, once smooth and blank, were now cracking small fissures where thin beams of light escaped. A blue ethereal light like the glow of distant stars. These cracks pulsed synchronized with the thunder, and as I watched, the light seemed to be trying to expand, as if something inside them was struggling to break free. My hands shook. I felt the air in the room change, thicker, colder, as if the house itself was being swallowed by the presence of these creatures. This was no longer just a storm. Something greater was happening, something so ancient and primordial that my mind couldn't even begin to comprehend it. All I knew was that with each passing second, those figures grew larger, and with them, the sound, the noise, that was now less like thunder and more like a deep, mournful wail. And in that moment, the truth dawned on me. They weren't growing, they were getting closer. Each lightning strike, each thunderclap, wasn't nature's blind fury, wasn't the simple roar of a storm. No, it was the echo of their steps. Those beings, those colossal shadows, were walking through the veil of reality, and each crash that shook the earth was nothing less than the impact of their feet on the fabric of the world. The sound that terrified me was the sound of marching, a slow, deliberate march. They were coming toward me. What once felt like a distant cold light now surrounded me. I felt the air vibrate, the terrible rhythm of an incomprehensible force. My knees buckled, and I collapsed to the floor, too weak to react. Everything made sense at once. They were coming. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. I felt the pressure in the air intensify, as if the world itself was being compressed. My ears rang with a piercing noise, as if I was submerged underwater, sinking deeper and deeper into its depths. Breathing became difficult. They were almost here. The final thunderclap, the largest of them all, shook the entire house. I screamed, a sound swallowed by the chaos around me. The world collapsed around me as those shadows moved with an implacable slowness. Their footsteps echoed in my mind, beating like an ancient war drum, and the last thing I saw before I blacked out was their silhouettes engulfing the sky. When I woke, the silence was absolute. The sun was shining, the sky was clear, and the air smelled fresh, as it always does after a heavy rain. But there was no relief in my chest. I knew too well that the bright blue was a lie, a turquoise veil hiding the horror I had witnessed. It was only a pause, a brief calm. I know they'll come back. The next storm will bring their steps again, and next time, they'll arrive, lightning by lightning, thunder by thunder. When I was 18 and my sister was 5, I was babysitting in our family's basement while my mom was in the shower and my stepdad was asleep. I should mention that my stepdad has the deepest, most distinct voice I've ever heard. Anyone who meets him comments on it, and even customers at his job who've only spoken to him on the phone request his assistance by saying, "The one with the deep voice." This will become important later. It was my mom's birthday, so she was taking one of those long showers, and I knew she'd be in there for a while. I'd taken out some toys and turned on the TV, which was the only noise in the house besides maybe the faint sound of the shower. Our basement is set up so that the sofa is directly against the wall, next to the stair landing. When you're sitting on it, if you turn to the right, you can see straight up the stairs. In front of us was the rest of the room, TV, coffee table, etc. As a dumb 18-year-old who semi-loved taunting my sibling, I switched the channel to a scary movie. My sister glanced up at it briefly and proudly declared, "Sissy, I'm not scared." Of course, this took all the fun out of the situation, so I quickly turned off the TV and sat on my phone while my sister played on the floor with her toys. After a while, I heard a voice from the top of the stairs that sounded vaguely familiar, but could have been coming from no one in the house. Again, my mom was showering. I could still hear the running water, and my stepdad was asleep. It clearly wasn't his distinct voice. The voice was a woman's. My entire body ran cold, and I froze, knowing that if I looked to the right, I would see someone or something standing at the top of the stairs. I glanced down at my sister, who also stood frozen, tears in her eyes, staring straight at me. I didn't want to scare her, even though she was already petrified, so I calmly asked, "What's wrong, baby?" She whispered, as if not to be overheard by whoever was on the stairs. "Who was that?" I was still trying to stay brave, so I asked, "Who was that?" And she replied, "Who said that?" At that point, I knew she heard it too, and I knew I wasn't going crazy. I asked her what the voice had said, and she repeated it back to me exactly as I had heard it. The worst part of the whole thing was what it said and how it said it. In the calmest, almost absent voice, whatever stood at the top of those stairs said, "Hey, Kaylee?" Even typing it gives me the chills. That's my name. There was no emotion in the statement, but the small bit of inflection at the end made it clear it was a question, and it was a question for me. There was no way I was going to look up those stairs, and as I reached for my sister, she scrambled up and sat on my lap. We both stared straight ahead while we waited for my mom to finish her shower. After we heard the door open and her footsteps coming down the hall, about 10 minutes later, I was finally able to move. I carried my sister up the stairs and asked my mom if she had called me. She obviously said no, how could she? And she was right. There was no way it could have been her. My stepdad was still asleep. The voice had been a woman's. After explaining the whole situation to my mom, it dawned on me the voice sounded familiar because it was my own. My mom was brought to tears just by hearing the story and seeing how affected my sister and I were. She immediately believed us. This wasn't the last time we heard that voice either. My mom often calls me to let me know she's heard my voice calling for her, but saying words I'd never use or things I wouldn't say, things like mommy or I need help. I don't live in that house anymore. I'm rarely there, and I haven't called my mother mommy since I was a child. When I did still live there, though, I would often hear my name. Once I even heard myself say, "Bless you," after I sneezed. Sometimes it was just whistling or the low pitch of myself humming tunes I never knew. My mom likes to joke about it now, warning any future partners or roommates that they absolutely don't want to live with me because, in her words, I'm followed by something. I'm starting to believe her. Things have happened to me since I was a kid, but I always brushed them off, maybe shared them with a few friends, and moved on. I don't think I've ever moved on from this encounter, though, and I don't think I'll ever escape the sound of my own voice. I was 14 when my parents sent me to stay with Aunt Meredith and Uncle Cole in Pennsylvania. I looked forward to a few weeks with my cousins, Sarah and Ethan, in a town that felt like the perfect escape from the monotony of home. Their neighborhood was quaint, a quiet cul-de-sac with tidy lawns and kids playing until dusk. The kind of place where you'd expect the ice cream truck to make its rounds like clockwork. Sarah and Ethan were only a year or two younger than me, but they had endless energy and a knack for finding trouble. Almost immediately, they introduced me to Henry and Jacob, two boys from a few houses down. Jacob was 16, tall with a sly grin that made you wonder if he was always up to something. We spent most days exploring the woods of Kimber Hills at the end of the street, a place that felt wild and alive, where every shadow seemed to hide a secret and every rustling leaf sounded like a hidden creature. I loved the thrill of stepping into the unknown, but one afternoon, as we were getting ready to head out, a woman from the last house on the street called out to us. She had a kind face and silver-streaked hair pulled into a neat bun. "You kids can play anywhere," she said from her porch, "even down by the creek. But to stay away from Puckett Street." We stopped, surprised by her tone. Sarah gave me a puzzled look. "What's Puckett Street?" I asked. The woman's smile faded. "Just trust me, dear," she said, her voice firm. "You don't want to go there." At dinner that night, I brought it up. Uncle Cole was sitting at the head of the table with my aunt to his left. He was usually easygoing, always ready with a joke. But his face darkened at the mention of Puckett Street. He set his fork down with a deliberate clink, eyes narrowing. "You didn't go there, did you?" His voice was low, almost a growl. I shook my head quickly. "No, we didn't. I just heard about it." Aunt Meredith exchanged a look with him, her fingers nervously twisting the napkin in her lap. "Mr. Stimble lives there," she said softly. "He's not a nice man, likes to keep to himself." Uncle Cole leaned forward, his voice firm. "You listen to me. Stay away from Puckett Street. No one goes there. Ever." The sternness in his voice sent a chill down my spine. I nodded, too afraid to ask more. For a few days, we kept to the familiar trails, trying to forget about it, but Jacob was curious. He kept bringing it up in little ways, taunting us about being too scared to find out what was so bad about Puckett Street. Then, one hot afternoon, Jacob threw a rock into the creek and smirked. "What do you guys think so bad about Puckett Street?" he challenged. "Maybe they're hiding something, or some old guy just wants his privacy. Either way, I want to know." Ethan hesitated. "Maybe there's a reason everyone says to stay away." But Jacob wasn't convinced. "Come on, aren't you curious?" I felt a pit form in my stomach. I wanted to say no, but I found myself nodding. "Just a look," I whispered, glancing at Sarah, who seemed equally unsure, and then we go. We moved deeper into Kimber Hills, the path narrowing and the trees pressing in close. After about 15 minutes, we reached it. A fence made of old wood and rusted wire, almost swallowed by ivy and brush. Beyond it, Puckett Street stretched like a forgotten road. There it was, a small house with cream-colored siding, its faded purple shutters looking out of place. The lawn was too perfect, the rocking chair on the porch swaying slowly, despite the stillness of the air. "See? Just a house," Jacob scoffed. "Nothing special." But everything about the place felt wrong. Too quiet, too still. Before any of us could protest, Jacob grinned and darted across the street. "I'm going to knock," he called back. We watched, hearts pounding as he knocked once, twice. No answer. He turned to leave, but then the door creaked open. A massive figure filled the doorway. A hand shot out, grabbing Jacob by the collar and yanking him inside. The door slammed shut, cutting off his scream as quickly as it began. Henry began pushing me and Sarah. "Go, go, go!" he hissed, and we ran, tearing through the underbrush, not stopping until we burst into my aunt and uncle's house. Breathless and panicked, we blurted out what happened. Uncle Cole's face went pale. He grabbed a pistol from the drawer and headed out, without a word. Aunt Meredith's hands shook as she dialed 911. Hours passed. The sun dipped below the horizon. Shadows stretched long and dark across the walls. Henry's mom came to get him, leaving just Aunt Meredith and me waiting in a heavy, fearful silence. When Uncle Cole finally returned, he looked shattered. His jeans were smeared with mud, and his shirt was soaked with sweat. His hands trembled, and his eyes were wild, hollow. "What happened?" Aunt Meredith whispered. He swallowed hard. "The police broke down the door," he said, voice barely steady. Stimble didn't answer. They heard screaming, an awful, inhuman sound. "They shot him. He's dead." Aunt Meredith gasped, but Uncle Cole continued. "They found Jacob, or what was left of him, pieces, scattered like something had torn him apart." I felt a cold dread settle over me. "Did Mr. Stimble?" Uncle Cole's eyes were wide and haunted as he shook his head. "There was something in that house," he murmured. "Not a man, not an animal, but something. When they shot Stimble, a door to the attic creaked open, and this thing came out, skeletal, thin as bone, eyes burning like embers in a skull. It moved so fast, like a shadow given life, and it took Jacob's remains back into the attic, clutched in its jaws. The officers, they swear it was some kind of demon." He rubbed his face, tears slipping down his cheeks. "No one believes them. No one believes us. But now, with Stimble gone, that thing is no one to control it, no one to feed it." Aunt Meredith stood up shaking. "You're going home," she said to me, her voice trembling, exerting what little control she had over the situation. "First thing in the morning." I didn't argue. I could feel the terror in the air, the way it pressed down on us. They put me on the first bus out, and I never went back. Aunt Meredith and Uncle Cole moved soon after, leaving without a trace, just like they had promised. So, if you ever find yourself in northern Pennsylvania and see a house with cream-colored siding and faded purple shutters, keep driving. Don't look back. Whatever's in that attic is still there, waiting. The caretaker is gone now, and it's hungry. I came back from work. I parked my car, and then noticed my wife waiting for me. I got out of the car, holding hands. We entered the house. She took a seat on the couch. I bought some glasses. My wife grabbed my hand. I was happy. We talked. As she spoke, I was amazed. She knew so many things. We held hands. We kissed. Then I got a message on my cell phone. It was my wife, telling me she had to stay overtime at work, and she'll get home in 3 hours. I got on my feet and stood there confused. My wife, like being, asked me what was wrong. I made the mistake of telling her about the message I got. At that moment, her eyes turned fully black, with no pupils. She jumped on her feet. I ran. A light bulb exploded. I kept running. She approached me. I hid in the bathroom. I could hear that thing roar and pound on the door. The door handle was moving rapidly. The door was shaking very violently. I squeezed myself through the bathroom window and jumped into the courtyard. I made a run for it to the car. I entered it. My wife appeared with a huge kitchen knife. I backed off and ran her through. I smashed the vehicle into the gate, but failed to break it. The monster was approaching. The car didn't move anymore. No more gas. I blocked the car doors. The fake wife began hitting the car while roaring and hissing. I realized I had to stop her before my real wife got home, or else that thing might harm her. I got out of the car, I pushed the monster aside and made a run to the basement, where I held my shotgun. I got there, the enemy arrived. Its body is twisted in inhumane ways. I fired the weapon. Again. The woman crawled backward on the wall and onto the ceiling. I fired my shotgun, but she turned into multiple shadows that began to spread all over the walls. I ran to the house and grabbed a Bible. I began reading from it and praying. Shadows moved across the wall, forming terrible shapes. The lights flickered. The chairs and the table were moving back and forth. The shadows converged into the room to form the same entity that looked like my wife. I kept praying. Suddenly, the entity turned into a giant shadow that flew right through the window. I did it. I was now safe. My real wife arrived. I told her everything. She hugged me. I told her how scared I was, and that I was so glad it was all over. Who said it was over? Asked my wife. Then her eyes turned fully black, and she laughed, but not in a way a human ever could. I ran again. Another wife arrived, the real one. The fake one made 2 knives float into her hands. I grabbed the shotgun. My wife grabbed it and told me to lure it to the mirror upstairs. The thing followed me. I was cut by her knives, which she wielded like an ancient warrior. Me and my wife prayed. I fired the weapon, each shot driving her closer to the mirror. The mirror absorbed the entity, and my real wife quickly covered it. We hugged. From then on, that mirror will always stay covered, and we tried to avoid getting close to it. I once saw a man thrown from a moving train. He was my friend, and he was the first person to try and help me survive the life of hopping freight trains. That's how things go for us. They change often and suddenly. I had to do bad things in order not to follow him. Well, those guys that gave him the toss did bad things to me. They were definitely done to me. I had to let them. I was just 17 then, so it had to have been about 10 years ago. I don't really keep track of days like most people. Could be more or less, doesn't matter. The fact is, he wasn't the only person I've seen kill. It's not the life my parents had planned for me, neither. They had good jobs, good homes, and good intentions. The intentions flew out the window once my brother was born deformed. Then they had none of those things, as the medical bills, anger, and a forgotten little boy helped collapse the foundation of that home. I doubt they even alerted the police when they realized I was gone. Better to be rid of the demon child with higher expectations than being a caretaker. It was unfair of them to assume I would grow up to take care of Jacob when they died. They never even bothered to ask me. I could just see it. What else was I supposed to interpret finding my torn up acceptance letters in the garbage as? No doubt they left them there for me to find. The last straw was a home-cooked meal, hosting my dad's boss from the factory, coaxing me down the path into his nightmare with a promise of a job in exchange for servitude. Fuck that. You dead-eyed flannel-clad zombie? I was not prepared for that decision, and it took me a long time to come to grips with it. Suburbia had not raised me for the harsh reality that awaits someone who wanders on rail cars. It's fucking brutal. It would have been easier to get a Xanax prescription and become the drone my parents raised me to be, but my heart wasn't into that. I don't do drugs at all, in fact. It probably stems from watching a guy named Stu arrive in Portland, one arm light and low on blood. Fucker decided to take PCP in a rail car and flipped out, ended up ripping open the door, just green trees whizzing by, and sticking his arm out to grab onto them. This impressive act of courageous idiocy flung him back against the door and separated his body from his arm at the shoulder. I listened to him scream the rest of the way and pondered whether it would have been better had he not stayed in the car and just flown out with his arm. Being dead might be better than being a one-armed bun. He did not appreciate my suggestion that he add wounded vet to his panhandling shtick and moaned at me about it. I didn't care. What was he gonna do? Fight me? Obviously, the question as to the appeal of this life is a constant point of discussion, usually over firelight and communal pint of cheap booze. Why do you do this dangerous, lonely thing? The answer is universal, but comes in different forms. Best I can come up with, we are all just pieces of the wrong puzzle, in a box with a picture we don't match, bought at a second-hand store for $5. Perhaps we are all looking for a right box out here. My reason? My favorite part, I guess, is the time in the rail car with the door ajar, just watching the scenery fly by as I have a deep conversation with a complete stranger while tugging on a pint bottle. Being alone is fine, but interviewing the dark souls of wanderers by torchlight is what gets me going. Their stories are better than yours. Their philosophy has been tested in ways your average person will never. Your average person will never have to say a prayer, hoping that the person you're about to ride alone and legally with for an unknown number of hours isn't high on meth and violent, or God forbid horny. Deep shit bonus points if they're all those things and armed. But that is not why I'm bothering to write this post on a phone that I stole from a gas station attendant. I need to warn you never to ride in railcar UUH-17. Of all the advice I received in my life in the wild, the most bullshit piece was about the red box car UUH-17. Every few years, I'd meet someone and they would warn me to choose any other car if you see the face of the devil. That was the only similarity between these encounters. The rest of the story was always different and obviously fake. I laughed at them. A guy westbound from Gatlinburg told me it was filled with spiders. Another while we baked in a stalled boxcar outside Phoenix. Claimed he nearly drowned when water started to pour from the ceiling. This man lied to my face in the middle of the desert. I always saw through them, no matter how hysterical they became. They were just some jackass trying to pass a scary story off like real experience. After Phoenix, not 3 weeks later, I heard from this lady that she watched her brother melt on the way to Tallahassee, and I had had it. Melt like a chocolate bar in the fucking sun. It was when I vowed to ride every car I saw with the devil graffitied on the side of it. If that was an option, that's what I aimed for. I thought it fitting considering what my parents used to call me. The demon child in a demon car. They were always specific about UUH-117, but I had never bothered to look at the numbers anyway. Who gives a fuck what they're called? So I just decided I might as well make it my thing. Eventually, if it were gonna show up, it would. And so it became muscle memory to ride with the devil. UUH-117 caught me leaving Sacramento, headed back to Portland. Hell, for all I know, I had probably passed Stu's decomposed arm inside it. I had completely forgotten of its existence at this point, a condition I would never be able to enjoy again. I remember thinking the face on the side was a lot more elaborate than any other I had seen. It had unsettled me as I hopped on and slammed the door home to my own personal hellscape. I have worked for a long time to repress this ride, but no amount of brown liquor could wipe clean its memory completely. Bits and pieces of it come back to me in moments of idle silence, causing me to yell like a wounded and afraid coyote. My mother and father were in railcar UUH-17 along with me, them and that thing they call their son. They grew monstrous out of the shadows and into the dark lantern light, tall and hollow looking, doting on that creation, that grotesque mound of stinking flesh. All they could do was cater to its every snarl, cooing at its horrendousness. A recreation of my childhood home grew up the walls of the car before my very eyes. I was in a dimly lit version of the place I had run away from my entire life. My parents strapped me down to my childhood kitchen table and fed my leg to my mutant brother. I watched them do it. They propped my head up so that was all I could see. I felt them cutting into me, swaying away like lumberjacks into my meat and bones. I screamed at them, begged them to let me go, but they only smiled at me and the baby, shushing me and praising me for being a good brother. I was found in the rail yard nearly dead and carted away to the local hospital. The official report states I fell on the track and an oncoming train gave me a permanent hop, which is such complete bullshit. Those dumbfuck rail yard bulls know my stump wasn't a clean cut. Even the doctor said it looked like it was cut away with a steak knife. No, everyone knows you don't have to care about someone who doesn't pay taxes. Just patch him up and get him the F out of your sight, eh? Just another dirty face on the sidewalk. Vagabond. Bum. Get the fuck out of here. Never mind what has happened to me. Never mind what I've seen. I stopped rail jumping after that. It was impossible anyway, with only one leg. At least, that's the excuse I told myself when I tried to be willfully ignorant. Now I'm just a bum. A bum. Amputee in his late 20s with a cardboard sign that says, Iraq took everything from me. Please, if you see me or my sign, drop a buck or two. It'll really help. Maybe I should figure out a GoFundMe or something. Anything to help me raise cash so I can get headed down south. There's no way I can stay in this rail system. You see, I've seen UUH-17 4 times in the past month here around Seattle, and it feels too risky to think that's a coincidence, especially because I stay far from train tracks. That's why I'm spreading the word. I keep finding it out in the woods near where I set up my camp. Recently, I've been sleeping in the park, hoping it won't hunt me, but I'm constantly hassled by the police. Who knows? It can probably sneak up on me even in the city. I'm afraid every door I walk through might be the beast in disguise. My plan is to head to Belize, or maybe even farther. I don't think I want to be in the same hemisphere as that thing, but there's a part of me that knows my parents will do anything for their little boy, and I bet the little baby is hungry again. Part of me knows I will have a final ride. I can feel it in my stump. Whatever the fuck you do, listen to me. Do not ride with the devil and stay the fuck away from UUH-17. Don't ignore this warning, because it will use the things you fear to rob you of everything you know. Don't ride railcar UUH-17. When I was a kid, I loved catching bugs. I'd catch them in jars, butterfly nets, and sometimes with my bare hands. I'd watch spiders spin webs between my fingers. I was never bothered by buzzing wasps or bees circling my lunch. I'd never been stung. and I never felt threatened. Maybe I was just a stupid kid, but I figured that live and let live was the only way to be. I was 8 years old when my family went on a trip, first to my aunt, then to my grandmother. My aunt lived in this rural Minnesota town in the middle of nowhere. We were just staying for a couple of days before continuing east. When we got there, we'd been driving for 6 hours straight. I'd been carsick the entire time and hadn't been able to eat or drink a thing. It was the hottest week of the summer, leaving me dehydrated and exhausted. And of course, my parents were fighting about it. They were fighting from the moment they stepped out of the car. I tuned it out. I could tell from the sound of their voices it was going to be a long one. The kid says he's fine, so he's fine, my dad complained. I told you we should have stopped for a milkshake. Mom groaned. He's gonna be sick all night. And you think putting dairy in him is gonna fix that? Come on. So we're just gonna let him suffer? Is that it? Is that your solution? Yes, of course, yes. I love making him suffer. That's the best thing. I love it so much. It kept going back and forth. I picked up my backpack and unfolded a couple of Spider-Man comics that I'd read at least 8 times over. I wandered off to get away from the car and the noise, watching my aunt coming out of the house to de-escalate. I plopped down on a rock in the backyard, letting my stomach settle. I'd always hated cars, and being stuck in one on a hot summer's day for 6 hours, it was torture. As the sounds of nature washed over me, I started to feel like a person again. A breeze in the wind, a faint flutter of birds. They sang different songs out there. Diving back into the adventures of Miles Morales, I heard the familiar buzz of an insect. Looking up, I saw something I'd never seen before. Now, this was a long time ago, but I'll never forget it. It looked like a wasp, but had much more prominent antennae and a bigger abdomen, and the color, it wasn't yellow. It was a bright red. It had landed on one of my aunt's blue garden sunflowers, making the colors clash. I'd never seen an insect like it before. Looking back at my parents' car, I knew I had a jar or two hidden away there for just such an occasion. I was gonna catch it. Then again, I didn't want to risk losing sight of this thing, so I did what I'd always done when I saw something I wanted to catch. I used my hands. I approached inch by inch, cupping my hands. The thing just sat there, head turned sideways to look at me. It didn't move, not even a twitch. I slowly closed my hands around it, plucking the top of the flower as I did, stood up and walked back to the car, putting one careful foot in front of the other. Dad had gone inside to make a sandwich, while my mom and aunt stayed by the car, now having a sort of second-hand argument. What kind of person refuses their child a bottle of water? Mom scoffed. What kind of person is that? I tried to get her attention, but she was in full rant mode. My aunt, ever the diplomat, tried to calm her down, to no avail, of course. Mom? I repeated. Can you get the jar from the trunk? It's a bottled water, she continued. It barely costs the price of the bottle. Is his time so valuable that it overpowers ours? That it consumes the time of those around him? Mom? Then a burn. Ice pushing through my skin, digging into the vein of my arm. Like my own pulse was working against me, to wound me. I dropped the flower, screeching like a wounded animal. All of a sudden, the fight was over. Dad ran out. Mom scooped me up in her arms. They brushed my hair, kissed my forehead, and assured me how everything was going to be okay as I bawled my eyes out. And the red wasp thing? It was just gone. According to my aunt, all I'd had in my hand was that flower. I got a bad reaction to it. I was sweating, and it felt like my ears had this filter to them. As if the world was hidden behind a glass bubble, I could hear my parents arguing again. My dad wanted to take me to the hospital, while my mom argued that calling an ambulance would be faster. Meanwhile, my aunt was getting me some of her allergy medication, basic antihistamines. I must have collapsed. I woke up to an unknown man shining a flashlight in my eyes. A paramedic. He asked me to follow the light with my eyes. I did. But the moment I tried to move my head, I got this ache in my neck. Looks like a bad reaction, he said, but he's all there. We could bring him in, but I think some rest and ice cream ought to do it. You sure? My mom chimed in. No sign of infection, just a bit of redness, the man said as he turned my hand around. It's your call, but yeah, he'll be fine. Neither of my parents were convinced, but they couldn't decide on what to do, so they just went with his recommendation. My aunt tucked me in right there on the couch, putting on an X-Men movie for me to watch in the background. They spoiled me with ice cream and did me the courtesy of keeping their arguments short and hushed. Later that night, the house was silent. Whatever had gone through me had passed, and I was left wide awake in a sleeping house. My aunt slept on a futon down the hall, while my parents stayed in her bedroom. I tried to work the remote to put the movie back on mute, but I couldn't get it to work, so once again I resorted to reading my comics. I counted the seconds, hearing the tick-tocking of a clock from the kitchen. There was some light coming in from a large window to my left. It wasn't a great view or anything, just flat farmland for as far as the eye could see. I settled in for a long and boring night, hoping I could fall back asleep sooner rather than later. But as I read, there was a dark splotch on the page, a shadow coming from the window. Looking up, I could see one of those red wasps outside the window. I got up and walked over to it. Even then, I didn't feel threatened by it. The pane of glass between us helped. I tapped at it with my finger, and it didn't move. I shifted my finger a little to the left, and tapped again, and it followed, tapping a little all over. It seemed to follow wherever my finger moved. I did a couple of zigzags just for fun, and made it do a little jig. I couldn't help but to smile. It looked funny. You didn't want to hurt me, huh? I whispered. Right? I could feel a warmth in my arm, a reminder of the sting, but also a sort of reassurance that sting was as bad as it would get. A part of me felt that if it were to happen again, it wouldn't be anywhere as bad. You wouldn't, I concluded. You're a good guy. I spun my finger in a circle and the red insect followed suit. What a funny little guy. We decided to stay an extra day to give me some time to recover. Dad didn't mind. Any excuse to spend less time with his mother-in-law was a blessing. My mom and aunt spent some time at a nearby flea market while Dad and I watched scary movies that I promised not to tell Mom about. We'd just finished Jaws when Dad had to go make a call for work. As I wrapped a blanket around me, one of those red wasps crawled up my leg. At first I was a bit startled, but it just kinda sat there, antenna poking around like little feelers. Sorry, I whispered. Didn't see you there. It crawled across my leg and up my arm, ending up on my thumb, facing my index finger. It seemed to follow my finger as I wiggled it, like a cat staring down a toy. I played with it for a couple of minutes. As I did, I noticed a couple of shadows cast on the coffee table next to me. Looking up, I could see about a dozen more red insects on the window, every single one of them moving with a twitch of my index finger. You understand, don't you? I whispered under my breath. You get it. And while they couldn't speak, I knew I was right. As our time at my aunt's place came to an end, our trip resumed. My aunt was coming along, so I had to share the back seat. Dad was back behind the wheel, and my mom was the ever-loyal co-pilot, armed with an ever-present armada of suggestions. My aunt had brought this thick book of word search puzzles for us to play with. I was dreading it. I didn't want to get carsick again. I tried my best to prepare, but there was just no right way to do it. If I ate something, I would feel like a shaken soda bottle all day long. If I didn't, I'd feel like I had a knife rattling in my empty stomach. There was just no way to win. My mom always urged me to try some home remedy kind of thing, but it never worked. No yogurt, no chewing gum, no warm soup. Nothing worked. But that day, as we went on our way, I was fine. There was this warm, tranquil heat spreading throughout my body that it calmed me. No matter how much the car shook, or how powerful the glare of the sun stung my eyes, it's as if a shield had passed over me. I was fine. This was fine. I'd see the red wasps every now and then throughout the day. A couple of them on a fence at a rest stop. One of them resting by my foot in the car. A couple more crawling across the sunroof. I rarely had to look for long before I'd spot one or two, and they didn't seem to bother anyone. Maybe I was the only one who noticed them. I'd play a little with them, making them follow my finger around or fly in a circle. It's as if there was a sort of quiet understanding between us, and without the constant car sickness, I was in a better mood than usual. It seemed to spread to everyone in the car. Hell, even my parents stopped arguing, if only for a bit. I was leaning my head against the window, watching the sun slowly set. We weren't far away from our destination. We'd stopped for dinner at McDonald's earlier, so this was the home stretch. A single red wasp was stuck to the window, tapping its antenna to match the rhythm of my finger. I was trying to blink away a creeping tiredness, not really paying attention. As we slowed down for a four-way stop, something jolted me awake. A feeling asking me to take a closer look out the window. A car going down the left lane, about to pass a red light, crashing right into us. I called out to my dad, who stepped on the brakes. We managed to turn just as the car passed us at 75 miles per hour, inches from our bumper. Looking down at my feet, one of the red wasps curled around the tip of my shoe. They had done this. They'd helped me. They really were my little friends. We arrived at my grandmother's place, but for the next few days, I was busy exploring my strange and sudden friendship with my newfound companions. They seemed to have followed me. I'd see them swarming outside the window where I slept, or around my dirty clothes, or my shoes. Sometimes one would land on me and just hang out. I made a little game out of having one of them zigzag between my fingers, like a coin trick. It was magical. I felt like a superhero, and if I just slowed down for a bit, I could almost hear them, not with words, but intention. They'd point out interesting things. They'd warn me of danger. Hell, if I wanted to, I could direct them to attack. I could, but I wouldn't. But in my heart of hearts, by God, I knew I could. It'd be so easy. And somehow no one seemed to notice, almost as if they kept out of sight for everyone else. It all came to a point when I was out walking with my mom. She was a smoker, but my grandmother refused to allow smoking anywhere near her house. So Mom had to step away. She took this time to bring me along for a walk along the beach. It became a little ritual. As we passed by a patch of high grass, I got that feeling again. Not as a warning this time, but an invitation. Mom was busy with her cigarette, so I stepped away to look out over the grass. It didn't take me long to spot them. dozens of little red dots coming my way. Within seconds, they were swarming me. It was a bit startling but harmless. They danced around me, crawling across me in patterned lines, a harmonious buzzing resonating with the warmth spreading from my arm. I went deeper into the grass, feeling more and more of them congregate around me. They wanted me to go further, away from Mom and all the others. We could go have fun. They'd take care of me, they promised, and I believed them. There was a scream somewhere off in the distance. Something covered my face. The gentle buzzing turned into a raging, chaotic noise storm. I was grabbed and dragged, and it sounded like my mom was getting stung. She was screaming for my dad. Her screams turned to wheezing coughs, and I didn't see a thing. I was lifted off the ground as I lost all control. More people screaming, fabric being waved around. I could feel the buzzing growing frustrated and panicked, trying to reach for me. Then a door slammed. I was in a bathroom. I could hear my grandmother desperately caring for my mom just outside. As my aunt called the emergency services, I was stuck in the bathroom with my dad, who was brushing my arms and taking off my shirt. I didn't understand what was going on. He said something about getting ointment as he threw open the door and hurried into the kitchen. For a moment, it was just me. I looked in the mirror. At first, I didn't recognize myself. It didn't look like me. My skin had taken on a reddish tint. I had insect bites all over and swelling mounds all over my arms and neck. But looking down, it didn't hurt. I hadn't even noticed. It seemed that I was the only one who wasn't in a complete panic. They'd stung me. They'd been stinging me this whole time, and I hadn't felt a thing. Standing there looking into the mirror, I could feel them. They wanted me to go back outside. They demanded it. They were so desperate for me to come back to them that they would do anything to make that happen. I started to realize just how bad things were about to get. They weren't going to stop. Never. My dad came back in with a blanket soaked in cold water, which he wrapped around me. He also had a kind of eucalyptus ointment that he smeared across my neck. My mom was groaning in the other room, clearly in pain. Before I had the chance to ask, my dad said, "She's gonna be okay. We gotta focus on you." I nodded. As I did, I could hear my aunt yelling. Before I realized what she was saying, my dad closed the bathroom door and tried to cover the cracks with towels. I could hear little buzzing taps against the door. I could feel how desperate they were, how angry they were. If I wasn't coming out, they'd hurt people. All these people. And then, me. There was no way to explain or rationalize it. I tried to find words, but they were drowned out in panicked yelling. I tried to focus, but it felt like my head was crackling with impressions. I hadn't even noticed how my dad had poured me a bath. I got in without questioning it. I was sure he had his reasons. Looking back at it, I think it was a way for him to make sure I was safe from the wasps, but in that moment, I didn't know what to think. Besides, thinking had started to hurt. "Stay here," he gasped. "I'm gonna help your mom." And with that, he was out the door. I was safe, for now. I leaned back, letting my ears dip below the surface of the water. Even then, I could hear my pulse and the buzzing of wings as I closed my eyes and focused. That feeling in my bones became clearer. Finally, there were words. "Come out. Come to us. Leave. Run. Be free." As clear as day, I'd feel thumps of pain across my body as I imagined myself as one of the wasps slamming into the door. I'd feel their rage as they attacked. I'd feel my limbs being torn as they were swatted away. I'd twist and turn in my bath as I imagined myself being crushed, biting, stinking, raging against whatever I could attack, to kill, to reach. Years later, my father would describe to me what he'd seen. From his point of view, he'd seen me having a seizure in the bath, trying to stab at him with an invisible knife, all the while repeating, "Out, out, out." What happened next is unclear to me. A lot of it was told to me afterwards by my parents, but in the moment I was out of it. The ambulance couldn't get to us, so they had to drive me to the hospital. Dad rolled me up in a bathrobe, hurried out to the car, and got me in the back seat. My mom had been stung about a dozen times, but it wasn't life-threatening. Still, she needed to get checked out as well. That ride to the hospital could have gone either way. All I remember is blinking in and out of consciousness. The strangest little details, like the feel of the car seat texture rubbing against my legs, the smell of cigarettes on my mom's breath, my aunt's hairspray, and the color of my grandmother's painted nails, all of it mixed with sparks of something else. My head getting crushed against the windshield, the pain in my limbs as I tried to hang on to the side of the car, things that obviously weren't happening, but in a way, they were. I was experiencing some other strange symptoms. I was sweating something that can best be described as a mild adhesive. My eyes were swelling, pressing against my skull. My tongue had turned a sudden white, and my veins were so discolored you could see the blood pump through them. I don't remember being admitted to the hospital. I don't remember being put on a ventilator or being given allergy shots. And still, just like that night at my aunt's house, I woke up somewhere in the middle of the night. I remember a terrible ache and an itch in my eyes. It was a dark room, where my mom and dad were huddled up in the corner. They were out cold, probably exhausted from the whole ordeal, but there was someone else in the room too, not my aunt or grandmother. The large thing, the other. It was standing by the door. The warmth I'd felt was almost gone, but what little I had left in me had a direct connection to it, a thread, connecting it to me. It looked like a person in a sort of coat, but I knew it wasn't. It was pretending. This was not human. In the brief glimpses of understanding that we shared, I saw fields of maggots raising an entire countryside, laying waste to corn, cotton, rye, wheat, everything and anything. Creatures growing in meat like seeds in the soil, lines of hundreds of people baking in the sun, ready to burst with ravenous life, screams in the night, stopping suddenly as a sickeningly sweet smell filled my senses. The thing came closer. It was asking me to accept. It was a threat, a promise, and an expression of adoration all at once. We could be friends, best friends. It had been like me. Before I even knew what to think, it was all silent. What little warmth I'd had left in me was gone. Two pale orbs reflected the blinking lights from the machine that kept me breathing as unconsciousness took me away. A final thought, sadness. It took me months to recover. I had strange allergic reactions to seemingly random things for weeks on end. One day it'd be peanuts, the next day it'd be peaches or common soap. I'd get rashes, parts of my hair would fall out. They'd have to extract these inch-long stingers from my arms and slather me with disinfectant. But over time, it all went away. I think the only thing that stuck around was an allergy that my mom contracted to tobacco soap. Or maybe she just began associating smoking with the most stressful day of her life. Either way, she quit cold turkey. I've always admired that. My dad does too. Now it's been over 2 decades since that summer. Looking back at it, it all seems like this distant other world, something that happened to someone else. It has been hard to convince myself that it was actually real. But a couple of weeks ago, I was in an accident. A cable at work snapped, whipping straight across the workshop, smacking against a shelf. As it whipped back, it struck me across the left arm, leaving an inch-deep gash in my arm. And I swear to whatever gods may be, a little red wasp crawled out. The same first one that had stung me on that warm summer's day over 20 years ago.